The log reads, Phoebioluminescence readings, sector gamma -7, consistent with predicted patterns. Minimal variance. Asterisk, the words are sterile, clinical. They mirror the movements of my hand as I input the data, each keystroke a precise, calculated action. It is a rhythm I cling to, a shield. The air hangs heavy, saturated. It tastes of wet earth and something older, something like the slow decay of graves. The humidity clings to my skin, a film of perpetual dampness. I adjust the pressure gauge on the atmospheric regulator. A hiss, a brief, metallic sigh. The facility itself is a tomb, sunk into the crushing blackness of the Mariana Trench. Steel and concrete, a desperate claw hold against the unfathomable weight of water above. My boots click against the polished metal floor, the sound echoing strangely in the confined space. Each footfall feels deliberate, a small act of defiance against the silence that presses in from all sides. He watches. Always watches. The cat. A solid black silhouette against the dim, emergency lighting. His eyes are the only source of true illumination, 22 points of emerald fire in the gloom. He doesn't blink, doesn't move unless I do. A silent, unsettling sentinel. I don't remember bringing a cat down here. Protocol explicitly forbids it. Yet he is here. A constant, unnerving presence. The bioluminescent samples glow faintly in their containment vessels. A spectral, ethereal light. They re beautiful in a way, a fragile defiance of the crushing darkness. I remember a case, years ago. A young girl, a rare genetic anomaly. I'd been so sure, so confident in my assessment. A miscalculation, a preventable tragedy. The memory surfaces unbidden, a shard of ice in my gut. The sterile precision of the lab is a balm, a distraction from the ghosts I carry. A low hum vibrates through the floor, a subsonic tremor I feel more than hear. It is a constant companion down here, a background drone that seeps into your bones. It's almost rhythmic. I try to ignore it, cataloging the data with methodical precision. The numbers are my anchor, my reality. But the hum persists, a subtle distortion in the silence. There, as a faint, almost imperceptible chanting. It drifts in through the ventilation system, a murmur too low to decipher. A language I don't recognize, yet feels disturbingly familiar. It's not loud enough to be a threat, but it's persistent. It scratches at the edge of my awareness, a subliminal intrusion. I suppress a shudder. Just the pressure, I tell myself. Just the acoustics of the facility. I glance at the reflection in the polished steel of a nearby console. My face is gaunt, etched with fatigue. Dark circles ring my eyes. The lighting casts long, distorted shadows, making me appear older somehow. Wrong. A flicker of something unfamiliar crosses my features, a fleeting expression I can quite place. I quickly avert my gaze. The cat shifts slightly, his tail twitching. The low hum intensifies, a subtle pulse against the soles of my feet. The chanting seems to coalesce, to become marginally clearer. A guttural cadence rising and falling in a pattern that feels ancient. I return to the data log, forcing myself to focus on the numbers. Phoebioluminescence readings. Sector gamma -7. Asterisk, the words blur. The hum throbs. The chanting whispers. I feel a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. The air grows colder. I look up. The cat is staring directly at me. His emerald eyes seem to glow brighter than the overhead lights, burning into me with an unsettling intensity. The low hum resonates within my skull. The chanting swells, a chorus of voices just beyond the threshold of hearing. His gaze holds me captive, a silent, unwavering accusation. The data swam before my eyes, the numbers refusing to coalesce into anything meaningful. Physical pressure against my temples readings, sector gamma -7. Asterisk, the words were a mantra, a desperate attempt to anchor myself to something tangible. The hum vibrated deeper now, a physical pressure against my temples. The chanting, a persistent undercurrent, threatened to overwhelm the clinical precision I clung to. The cat, a black monolith, remained fixed, his emerald eyes burning into me. I pushed myself away from the console, the metal cold against my skin. Protocol dictated a structural assessment of sector gamma -7 every lunar cycle. A formality, really. The facility was built to withstand pressures that would crush lesser structures. Still, the directive stood. I picked up the handheld scanner, its weight familiar in my hand. The air tasted thick, almost viscous, as I moved towards the far wall. The concrete was rough beneath my fingertips, a stark contrast to the polished metal floors. I ran the scanner across the surface, the device emitting a series of high-pitched clicks and whirs. A minor anomaly registered near the base of the wall, a small imperfection, easily dismissed. But something compelled me to investigate. I knelt, angling the scanner S-light, embedded in the concrete. Almost seamlessly was a shard of glass. It was small, no larger than my thumbnail, but it caught the light, refracting it in an unsettling way. I retrieved a magnifying lens from my kit. The clicking of the lens as I adjusted the focus was sharp, intrusive in the oppressive silence. Through the magnified glass, the world fractured. It wasn't the concrete wall I saw. It was something else. A chamber identical in layout to this one, but bathed in a different light, a softer, warmer light. And people, figures dressed in dark, archaic clothing. Men with long hair and women in voluminous skirts. They moved with a deliberate slowness, their faces obscured by shadow. The scene was fleeting, a fractured glimpse, but it was undeniable. The facility replicated in time, a grotesque echo of the past. My breath hitched. A trick of the light, a hallucination born of fatigue and isolation. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. The concrete walls stared back, solid and unyielding. The figures were gone. The warmth vanished. Only the cold, sterile reality of Sector Gamma -7 remained. The cat had moved. He was closer now, rubbing against my legs, a low purr vibrating through his frame. The chanting intensified, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to emanate from the concrete itself. I felt a tremor in the floor, a subtle vibration that resonated in my teeth. "Everything all right, Freya?" The voice startled me. Elias, the junior research assistant, stood in the doorway, his face pale in the emergency lighting. He was a fresh recruit, eager to prove himself. Too eager, perhaps. Just a minor anomaly, I said, my voice sounding strained even to my own ears. "Nothing to worry about," he hesitated, then spoke in a hushed tone. "There are rumors, you know, about this place." I frowned. Rumors? Old stories about the geological anomaly this facility was built near. They say it is a place where the veil is thin. He swallowed his Adam, sapple bobbing nervously. Some say it is a gateway. I dismissed his words with a wave of my hand. Superstition, we re-scientists. Elias, we deal in facts, not folklore. He didn't, respond, his gaze fixed on the floor. The chanting seemed to amplify, a chorus of voices whispering just beyond comprehension. The hum throbbed in my skull. I released the glass shard. It clattered against the concrete floor, the sound strangely loud in the oppressive silence. As it fell, a fleeting sensation brushed against my arm. A coldness, a whisper of fabric against my skin. I glanced down, expecting to see something, anything. But there was nothing. Only the black cat, his emerald eyes fixed on me, and the relentless rhythmic chanting that seemed to seep from the very bones of the facility. "Superstition," I repeated, a little too sharply. Elias didn't meet my gaze. The tremor in the floor persisted, a low thrumming that resonated in my teeth. It felt deliberate. Davies appeared then, materializing from the shadows like a reprimand. His face was a granite mask, his posture rigid. "Nguyen," he said, his voice clipped and devoid of warmth. A word. He led me away from Elias, down a corridor that smelled of ozone and stale recycled air. The rhythmic chanting followed, a persistent pulse beneath the hum of the facility. I felt the cat's gaze on my back, a prickling sensation on my skin. "Your recent behavior has been concerning," Davy stated, pausing before a reinforced steel door. The click of the locking mechanism echoed sharply. "You've been isolating yourself, obsessing over minor anomalies." "I am conducting a thorough assessment," I retorted, my voice tight, "as per protocol." "Protocol doesn't necessitate prolonged observation of a single insignificant imperfection," he countered, his eyes narrowed. "The shard, I understand you've been fixated on it." A wave of heat flushed my face. I hadn't realized my preoccupation was so obvious. It presented an unusual, refractive property. He sighed. A sound like air escaping a punctured tire. "Nguyen, this facility is crucial. We can afford distractions. Especially not those rooted in fanciful notions." He released the door. IV reviewed the excavation logs. There is a surprisingly complete record. Almost too complete. The archive room was a sterile tomb of data. Rows of digital files stretched into the gloom, the soft blue glow of the monitors reflecting in my eyes. The air here was colder, drier, and carried a faint, metallic tang. The rhythmic chanting seemed muted, swallowed by the dense information. I accessed the original excavation reports. The detail was meticulous, bordering on obsessive. Every geological stratum, every mineral deposit, every anomaly was documented with painstaking precision. It was unsettling. The sheer volume of information felt curated. The cat was there, perched atop a server rack, his emerald eyes gleaming in the dim light. I documented his presence in my log Thiffin Subject 47. Persistent observation, pattern recognition required. It felt absurd, writing about a cat as if it were a scientific specimen, but its ubiquity was becoming unnerving. It appeared and disappeared with a disconcerting lack of logic. The chanting returned, stronger now, interwoven with a brief, sharp fluting. A metallic ring, like a struck tuning fork, resonated in my ears before abruptly ceasing. My head swam. I reached for the edge of a console, steadying myself. I caught my reflection in the polished surface of a monitor. For a fraction of a second, the familiar face staring back wasn't mine. It was distorted. A collage of faces flickered across the screen. Dr. Albright, who died in a lab accident, GN. The engineer crushed by a falling support beam. Even old Mr. Henderson, the geologist who vanished without a trace. Their faces were etched with a silent terror, their eyes wide with a nameless dread. The image vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving me gasping for breath. "A trick of the light," I muttered, but the tremor in my hands betrayed my doubt. The rhythmic chanting intensified, a chorus of whispers just beyond comprehension. I felt a coldness creeping into the room, a dampness that clung to my skin. Davy's voice cut through the oppressive atmosphere. "Nguyen, I'm requesting a psychological evaluation. Your reports are erratic." I ignored him, my gaze fixed on the cat. It hadn't moved. It hadn't blinked. It simply watched then. It spoke. Not with words. Not with a voice I could hear with my ears. But with a wave of pure, unadulterated fear that slammed into my mind, a tidal wave of primal terror that threatened to drown me. It wasn't a sound, but a feeling. A visceral understanding of utter, inescapable dread. It was the fear of oblivion, the fear of being utterly alone, the fear of something ancient and unknowable lurking just beyond the veil. It pressed against my consciousness, a suffocating weight that stole my breath and froze my blood. The chanting swelled, a triumphant crescendo accompanying the cat's silent, terrifying communication. The storage unit reeked of dust and decay, a palpable weight pressing down on my lungs. The air tasted like rust and forgotten things. Davies hadn't explained why I was being sent down here, only that it was essential to the ongoing assessment. Essential to what, I wondered, as I navigated the cramped space, the beam of my flashlight dancing across stacked crates and discarded equipment. The rhythmic chanting, a constant drone in the background, seemed amplified within these confined walls. It resonated in my teeth, a physical vibration. Then I saw it. Resting on a crumbling workbench, shrouded in a tattered cloth, was a violin, not just any violin. The wood was dark, almost black, and the curves seemed wrong, unnaturally smooth. As I reached for the cloth, the facility's lighting stuttered, plunging the storage unit into a flickering gloom. The shadows stretched and writhed, transforming familiar shapes into grotesque parodies. A low hum, deeper than the chanting, emanated from the instrument itself, a resonant thrum that vibrated in my bones. I pulled the cloth away. The violin was crafted from what appeared to be bone, human bone. The bridge, the fingerboard, even the peg stand, all meticulously carved from the remains of someone. A chill, deeper than the dampness of the room, settled over me. My breath hitched in my throat. The scent of wet earth and old graves intensified, a suffocating blanket. My reflection in a nearby mirror shimmered, distorted. For a fleeting moment, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. The lines around my eyes were deeper, etched with a weariness that felt alien. My hair was streaked with gray. Then, superimposed over my face, a flicker flinged, a glimpse of a woman in severe, dark clothing, her eyes wide with terror. The image vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving me disoriented and nauseous. A trick of the light, timbre, I told myself, but the tremor in my hands betrayed my unease. I reached out hesitantly and touched the bone violin. The resonant hum intensified, a palpable vibration against my fingertips. The chanting swelled, a mournful dirge that seemed to emanate from the instrument itself. I found a file folder tucked beneath the workbench. 7. Project Lament. The contents were fragmented, hastily scribbled notes and blurred photographs. The documents detailed a previous investigation into the violin, conducted years ago. The researchers had documented similar phenomena: distorted reflections, unexplained illnesses, the escalating chanting. The last entry was abrupt, ending mid-sentence. The resonance is, "It's altering something. We need to." The rest was obscured by a black smear. The cat appeared then, silent as a wraith, perched on a stack of crates. Its emerald eyes glowed in the dim light, fixed on me with an unsettling intensity. It felt like a judgment. The rhythmic chanting became almost deafening, a relentless pulse pounding against my skull. I could feel a pressure building behind my eyes, a sense of impending dread. Davy's voice crackled over the comms. "Guyen, report. What is your status?" I ignored him, my gaze drawn back to the violin. It seemed to pulse with a faint internal light. I felt an almost irresistible urge to play it, to unleash the mournful music trapped within its bone structure. The cat shifted, its tail twitching rhythmically. It began to stalk towards me, its movements deliberate and unsettlingly graceful. I felt a coldness seeping into my bones, a dampness that clung to my skin. The chanting intensified, a chorus of whispers just beyond comprehension. I glanced down at my thigh, intending to adjust my trousers. My hand landed on something unexpected. A faint purplish bruise bloomed on my skin, a pattern of delicate, almost floral markings. I didn't remember falling. I didn't remember being touched. The chanting reached a fever pitch, a cacophony of sound that threatened to shatter my sanity. The cat stopped directly in front of me, its emerald eyes burning into mine. It tilted its head, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. And then it let out a low, guttural growl, a sound that resonated deep within my chest. The thumping started subtly, a tremor in the soles of my boots. It wasn't a mechanical vibration, more like a heartbeat fudi, slow, deliberate, emanating from beneath the concrete floor. The chanting, always present, seemed to synchronize with it, a morbid pulse echoing in the storage unit's confined space. Davies's voice, tinny and dismissive through the comms, did nothing to soothe the rising tide of unease. "Guyen, I'm registering elevated stress indicators. Recommend you take a break." A break. As if stepping away from the bone violin, from the unsettling cat, would erase the creeping dread that clung to me like a shroud. I ignored him, turning back to the file folder. Project Lament. The photographs were even more disturbing upon closer inspection. 40 grainy images of the researchers, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and something else, a kind of manic fascination. The last legible sentence before the black smear now resonated with a chilling clarity. The resonance isn't just affecting perception. My head swam. A fleeting snippet of a voice, archaic and unfamiliar, brushed against my consciousness. "The wood doth weep." It vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving me disoriented. I blinked, the purple bruise on my thigh throbbing faintly. It had spread, a delicate tracery of violet blooming across my skin, resembling nothing so much as frost patterns on a winter window. The cat watched me from atop the crates, its emerald eyes gleaming in the dim light. Each breath I took tasted of dust and something older, something damp and earthy. The rhythmic thumping intensified, vibrating through the floor and up into my legs. "It is the stress," I told myself, gripping the edge of the workbench. "It has to be." I returned to the archive, sifting through the remaining documents. They spoke of a local legend, a covenant made centuries ago between the early settlers and something else, something residing within the woods that bordered the facility's original location, a woodland deity. They called it 22A, a being of immense power and capricious whims. The settlers had offered sacrifices, promises of loyalty, in exchange for prosperity and protection. The documents detailed a ritual, a lament performed annually to appease the entity. The chanting swelled, morphing into something more complex. It wasn't just a drone anymore, it was a language, though I couldn't decipher the words. Another voice, clearer this time, echoed in my mind. The bargain's debt must be paid. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of decaying leaves and damp moss. I felt a pressure in my ears, a sensation of being submerged in water. Davy's voice crackled again, sharper this time. Nguyen, respond. Your vitals are erratic. I pressed my fingers against my temples, trying to block out the voices, the thumping, the chanting. The cat descended from the crates, its movements fluid and silent, padding across the concrete floor towards me. I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. The technicians were reporting anomalies. Equipment malfunctions, fluctuating power levels, distorted sensor readings. Davies, predictably, attributed it to interference and environmental factors. He couldn't, or wouldn't, comprehend the growing sense of wrongness that permeated the facility. The isolation was suffocating. I stumbled towards a mirror, needing to see if I looked as fractured as I felt. The surface was clouded with condensation, obscuring my reflection. I wiped it away with the sleeve of my jacket, and for a moment I saw nothing but distorted shadows. Then, my face swam into focus, and it smiled. Not my smile. Not the weary, cynical curve of my lips. This was a cruel, unfamiliar expression. A predatory twist of the mouth that sent a jolt of ice through my veins. My eyes, were different too. Harder, colder, devoid of the empathy that had once defined me. The reflection lingered for a fraction of a second, a grotesque mockery of my own identity. Before vanishing, I recoiled, my heart hammering against my ribs. The thumping intensified, a relentless drumbeat in my skull. The chanting reached a fever pitch, a swirling vortex of sound that threatened to consume me. The cat sat at my feet, its emerald eyes burning into mine, a silent, knowing witness. The thumping escalated. It wasn't just a vibration now. It was a physical shove against my sternum, a relentless pulse that mirrored the chanting's rising intensity. My vision swam, the purple bloom on my thigh throbbing in sync with the subterranean beat. "It's the stress, I repeated. The mantra a fragile shield against the encroaching disorientation, but the floor tilted beneath my feet, and the workbench seemed to sway. Davy's voice, distorted and tinny through the comms, felt miles away. "Nguyen, I'm ordering you to cease exploration. Immediate psychological evaluation is required." Cease exploration, as if I had a choice. The compulsion was a current, tugging me downwards, deeper into the facility's bowels. The cat, a silent, emerald-eyed sentinel, turned and padded towards a corridor I hadn't noticed before. A shadowed passage leading away from the archive. It paused, a subtle flick of its tail, an invitation. Davy's voice crackled again, laced with a frustration that bordered on panic. "Nguyen, do you copy? Your biosigns are spiking. Confine yourself to restricted duties." Restricted duties, a gilded cage. I ignored him, the thumping now a tangible pressure in my skull. Each step echoed strangely, amplified in the sudden silence beyond the archive's door. The scent of dust and decay intensified, mingling with a new, unsettling aroma, wet earth. The corridor twisted, a labyrinth of identical metal panels and flickering fluorescent lights. The chanting, though distant, was clearer here, a mournful dirge that resonated within my bones. The floor beneath my boots shifted subtly, a barely perceptible undulation that made me stumble. I reached out, bracing myself against a cold, damp wall. The air grew thick, heavy, tasting of something ancient and unsettling. The cat led the way, its movements fluid and silent, a phantom guide through the facility's forgotten arteries. I felt a prickling sensation on my skin, the unsettling feeling of being watched not just by the cat, but by something else, something unseen. The visions returned, no longer fleeting glimpses but sustained, unsettling overlays on reality. I saw superimposed on the sterile metal walls the gnarled roots of ancient trees, the damp moss clinging to weathered stone. A landscape that shouldn't exist within the confines of a subterranean facility. "Nguyen, respond." Davy's voice, desperate now, cut through the chanting. The comms sputtered, then fell silent. A low hum filled the corridor, a mechanical groan that seemed to emanate from the very structure of the facility. The lights flickered violently, plunging the corridor into brief, disorienting darkness. The thumping intensified, a rhythmic hammering that resonated through the floor and into my very core. I felt a disorientation so profound that I nearly collapsed. The cat nudged my leg, a silent reassurance, and continued its relentless pace. We reached a massive steel door, sealed with multiple layers of security protocols. The cat circled it, then sat, its emerald eyes fixed on a small, almost invisible keypad beside the door. The keypad blinked, displaying a sequence of numbers, a sequence that felt familiar. I recognized it not from memory, but from something deeper, something instinctive, a forgotten language, a primal understanding. I entered the code, the numbers clicking into place with a satisfying precision. The door hissed open, revealing a vast cavernous space Fortin, the facility's original power generation wing, long abandoned and forgotten. The air here was different, colder, heavier. The scent of wet earth was overwhelming, suffocating. It clung to my throat, coated my tongue. The chanting was deafening now, a swirling vortex of sound that seemed to originate from the very walls. I took a tentative step inside, and the thumping reached a crescendo, a physical blow that knocked me off balance. I caught the scent of wet earth and something ancient Fenty like decaying leaves, filling the air despite the facility's hermetic ceiling. The thumping slammed into me, a physical wave that sent a tremor through my legs. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a pressure, a tangible force pushing against my eardrums. The scent of wet earth, already oppressive, thickened, clinging to the back of my throat like a shroud. I stumbled, bracing myself against the cold steel wall of the abandoned power generation wing. My reflection stared back, a distorted caricature of a surgeon Fungant hollow, eyed the skin stretched taut over sharp bones. Another bruise bloomed on my forearm, a sickly purple spreading across the pale flesh. I hadn't remembered hitting anything. It was just there, like the scratches that laced my hands, the faint discoloration around my eyes. "It's the stress, Semdi," I repeated. The mantra a desperate attempt to anchor myself to reality. But the reality felt increasingly fragile, like a pane of glass about to shatter. Davy's voice, a distant, tinny echo, intruded on my thoughts. "Goyen, your vitals are erratic. Report to medical immediately." The words felt accusatory, a prelude to some inevitable judgment. I ignored him, my gaze fixed on the cat. It had grown not dramatically, but subtly, the shift in its size unsettling. Its emerald eyes glowed with an unnerving intensity, reflecting the flickering emergency lights like twin pools of molten jade. A low growl, a rumble deep in its chest, vibrated through the air, a sound that seemed to resonate with the chanting. The chanting. It had evolved. It was no longer just a mournful dirge, but a layered, discordant chorus. A rising collective scream threaded through the lower tones, a sound that scraped against my sanity. I felt a tremor in my hands, a frantic urge to cover my ears, to shut out the encroaching madness. I needed answers. Something, anything, to explain the bruises, the scratches, the visions. I turned, scanning the cavernous space. The facility's original power generation equipment lay dormant, hulking metal behemoths draped in shadows. Dust lay thick on every surface, undisturbed for decades. The air hung heavy, stagnant, pregnant with an unspoken dread. My gaze landed on a corroded metal panel half hidden behind a tangle of cables. A faint inscription, almost swallowed by rust, caught my eye. I traced the letters with a trembling finger. Chronal Echo, restricted access. The words sparked a flicker of recognition, a buried memory struggling to surface. I remembered a briefing years ago, a hushed discussion about a program deemed too dangerous, too unstable, shut down. I worked at the panel, the metal protesting with a screech of rusted hinges. Behind it lay a small, cramped chamber, illuminated by a single flickering bulb. The walls were lined with rows of dusty files, labeled in faded ink. I pulled one down at random. Project Chronal Echo Preliminary Report. The paper crackled as I unfolded it, the ink blurring under my trembling fingers. The report detailed a program designed to study temporal anomalies, to observe echoes of the past bleeding into the present. It spoke of subjects experiencing vivid hallucinations, fragmented memories, and physical alterations. The words swam before my eyes, a horrifying confirmation of my own deteriorating condition. A fleeting figure flickered at the periphery of my vision. 20. A woman in archaic clothing, her face obscured by shadow. I whirled around, but there was nothing there. Just the cat, its emerald eyes fixed on me, radiating an unsettling aura. It emitted a soft, rasping sound, like the rustling of dry leaves. The chanting intensified, the collective scream now almost unbearable. I felt a dizzying wave of nausea, a sense of disorientation so profound that I stumbled against the wall. I saw it then, in the corner of the chamber fossat, a pool of standing water, reflecting the flickering light. I leaned closer, drawn by an irresistible compulsion. My reflection stared back, but it wasn't quite right. The lines around my eyes were deeper, the skin more weathered, the expression feral. And then, for a fleeting, horrifying moment, the face in the reflection wasn't mine at all. It was the face of a woodland creature, fiti a deer, perhaps, or a wolf tuin, its eyes wide with an ancient, knowing terror. The scream escalated, a deafening crescendo that threatened to shatter my mind. The light stuttered, a frantic pulse of illumination that cast elongated, distorted shadows across the chamber. The chanting swelled, a tidal wave of sound that seemed to vibrate within my bones. It wasn't just audible now, it was a physical pressure, a force pushing against my skull. The metallic tang of fear coated my tongue. Davy's voice, amplified through the comms, was a frantic, distorted plea. "Nguyen, containment breach. Repeat, containment breach." But the words were swallowed by the rising crescendo of the chanting, a discordant symphony of dread. I tried to respond, to reassure him, but my voice caught in my throat, a strangled rasp. The reflections, they were no longer fleeting glimpses. They were solid, tangible. A woman in a dark, high-collared gown drifted past, her face obscured by shadow, her movements fluid and unsettling. Another figure, a man with a severe expression and a powdered wig, paused to stare directly at me, his eyes cold and judgmental. They weren't hallucinations anymore, they were Sudi there. My hand instinctively went to my arm, tracing the blossoming bruises. They throbbed with a dull ache, a constant reminder of my unraveling sanity. "It's the stress," I repeated. The mantra now a desperate, futile plea. But the stress wasn't explaining the faces, the figures, the growing sense of displacement. Davies, accompanied by 2 technicians, rounded the corner. Their faces were etched with a mixture of fear and suspicion. "Goyen, you need to report for evaluation. You're exhibiting signs of severe distress." He held a sedative dart, the glint of metal reflecting the erratic emergency lights. "I'm fine," I managed, my voice trembling. "I'm just observing." One of the technicians snorted. "Observing what? Ghosts?" The chanting intensified, a guttural roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the facility. The floor vibrated beneath my feet. A low growl resonated from the shadows, and the cat emerged, its emerald eyes glowing with an unnatural intensity. It padded silently towards Davies, brushing against his leg, a silent, unsettling accusation. Davies recoiled, his hand instinctively moving towards the dart. "Secure her," he ordered, his voice tight with apprehension. But before they could restrain me, a figure materialized between us, Stephanie, a man in a dark cloak, his face hidden by a deep cowl. He raised a hand, and the technicians froze, their movements stiff and unnatural. The air crackled with an unseen energy. "She's under my protection," the figure intoned, his voice a low, resonant rumble. Davies sputtered, his face flushed with anger. "Who are you? What's going on here?" The cloaked figure ignored him, his gaze fixed on me. "The veil thins," he murmured, his words barely audible above the chanting. The echoes grow stronger. Suddenly the floor beneath my feet shifted. A grinding metallic sound echoed through the chamber as a section of the floor retracted, revealing a vast dark chasm beneath. A gust of cold, damp air rushed out, carrying with it the scent of wet earth, and something else, something ancient and indefinable. The walls of the chamber seemed to ripple, the sterile metal surfaces dissolving into a vision of gnarled trees and overgrown vines. I stumbled backward, grasping for something to hold on to. But there was nothing. The facility, the research base, the reality I knew. It was all dissolving around me. I saw my reflection in a polished metal panel. But it wasn't me. The face staring back was older, weathered, the eyes filled with a chilling emptiness. A cruel smile twisted the lips of the reflection, a mocking imitation of my own expression. The smile widened, revealing rows of sharp, pointed teeth. The cat emitted a soft, rasping sound, like the rustling of dry leaves, and its emerald eyes burned into me, radiating an unsettling knowing. The lights plunged into darkness. A shattering of glass echoed through the chamber, a sound that seemed to pierce the very fabric of my being. Then, silence, a profound, oppressive silence, broken only by the relentless, rhythmic chanting. The silence pressed, a suffocating weight against my eardrums. Then, a tremor. Not the vibration of machinery, but something deeper, organic. A pulse rising from the earth itself. The rhythmic chanting, previously a distant drone, now resonated within my very bones, a physical vibration that threatened to shatter my teeth. I tasted copper, the metallic tang of panic coating my tongue. The darkness wasn't empty. It moved upward. A swirling vortex of shadow began to coalesce in the center of the chamber, tendrils of darkness twisting and writhing like living things. The air grew frigid, each breath a painful rasp in my lungs. The scent of wet earth intensified, mingling with a sickly sweetness that made my stomach churn. It smelled of decay, of ancient forests long swallowed by the earth. A low, guttural hum began to emanate from the vortex, a resonance that seemed to bypass my ears and lodge directly within my skull. The chanting shifted, morphing into something more. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a language, a demand. And somehow, impossibly, I understood it. Not the words themselves, but the fine meaning, a feeling of profound accusation, of violation. It spoke of a covenant broken, a slumber disturbed. The vortex solidified, resolving into a form that defied description. It was vaguely humanoid, but composed entirely of gnarled branches, decaying leaves, and pulsating moss. Roots, thick as pythons, snaked out from its base, disappearing into the newly revealed chasm. It was a mockery of life, a grotesque parody of nature. The emerald eyes of the cat narrowed, its pupils dilating in the gloom, as if mirroring the deity's own malevolent gaze. It's real, I thought, the realization a cold fist clenching around my heart. This is all real. You have awakened what was meant to sleep, the entity resonated. The voice a chorus of rustling leaves and cracking branches. It wasn't a sound spoken, but a feeling transmitted directly into my mind. The chanting swelled, a mournful dirge that seemed to emanate from the very stone of the facility. A shudder ran through me, a primal fear that bypassed reason and settled deep within my bones. It spoke of a connection, a tether. The facility's location wasn't random. It was built upon a nexus, a point where the veil between worlds was thin. The roots of this thing ran deep into the earth, drawing power from a source I couldn't comprehend. A source that had been carefully contained until now. My reflection shimmered within the deity's form, not as a static image but as a living, breathing entity. But it wasn't toy mime. The face staring back was older, etched with lines of weariness and despair. The eyes were hollow, devoid of any spark of humanity. A cruel smile twisted the lips of the reflection, a mocking imitation of my own expression. It was a glimpse into a possible future, a horrifying testament to the cost of my ambition. A future where I was something else. You seek knowledge, the deity resonated, its voice dripping with disdain. But knowledge demands a price. A balance must be restored. Something I didn't understand, but knew instinctively was terrible. The chanting reached a fever pitch, a chaotic symphony of dread that threatened to overwhelm my senses. The cat let out a low, mournful wail, a sound that seemed to echo the deity's own lament. It brushed against my leg, a silent plea, a desperate warning. I wanted to reach out, to comfort it, but my limbs felt heavy, unresponsive. The deity's form began to expand, its branches reaching outward, consuming the remaining light. The roots writhed, seeking purchase, extending like grasping claws. The floor trembled violently, and the walls seemed to buckle under the strain. The chanting intensified, a deafening roar that threatened to tear my skull apart. The scent of decay became overwhelming, a suffocating blanket that stole the air from my lungs. I stumbled backward, desperate to escape, but there was nowhere to go. The darkness was closing in. The reflection within the deity's form smiled wider, a predatory gleam in its eyes. The branches reached, and everything went black. The darkness pressed a suffocating weight. My limbs felt leaden, unresponsive. The reflection within the deity's form widened its cruel smile, the branches reaching. Then, a jolt. Not pain, precisely, but a sudden, violent displacement. A desperate, instinctive spasm. My fingers fumbled, scraping against cold metal, a beacon, an emergency transmitter. The effort of activating it felt monumental, each movement a battle against the encroaching weight. The insidious tendrils of something. My mind screamed a frantic, incoherent plea. Send. The device sputtered, a brief, pathetic whine against the oppressive silence. A red light blinked, a fragile defiance against the encroaching gloom. The chanting ceased. Abruptly. The silence that followed was almost worse, a vacuum sucking at my sanity. Then, a new sound. A high, pitched whine, like a dying insect trapped within the machinery. The emergency transmission was initiating. The image on the screen flickered, resolving into a grainy, distorted view. First, the cat, its emerald eyes burned in the darkness, an unsettling, knowing gaze. Then, a flash of the deity's form, the gnarled branches, the pulsating moss, the roots like pythons. A sickening wave of nausea rolled over me. The image fractured, dissolving into something else. It wasn't the facility. It wasn't the chamber. It was a scene ripped from the chronal echo. A village, nestled amidst ancient trees, bathed in the sickly light of a perpetual twilight. The air smelled of wood smoke and damp earth, a familiar scent that twisted in my gut. Figures in coarse clothing moved through the streets, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and resignation, and then I saw her, a woman older than I was now, her face gaunt and drawn. Her eyes, hollow and haunted, held a chilling familiarity. It was me, or a version of me. She was being pulled forward, not by human hands, but by creatures, twisted, humanoid forms with elongated limbs and eyes that gleamed with an unnatural light. They moved with a disturbing fluidity, their movements blurring the line between animal and something else. The scene lurched, the image stuttering as the transmission struggled to maintain a connection. The chanting returned, a faint, distant murmur that seemed to seep from the very screen. Have a peating, I thought. The realization a cold shard of ice in my chest peating. I am a component, a fixed point within a cycle of horror, A voice, strained and frantic, cut through the static. "Can you hear me? This is Technician Rhys Davies. I don't know what's happening. The facility, it showing me things." The voice cracked, breaking into a sob. She said. She said it's all connected. The chronal echo. It's not just a recording, it's a loop. The image on the screen dissolved, replaced by a burst of static. The whine intensified, then abruptly cut off, leaving only a deafening silence. The beaconess red light pulsed, a lonely sentinel in the encroaching darkness. Miles away, in a sterile, brightly lit psychiatric evaluation room, Rhys Davies stared into a mirrored wall. The fluorescent lights hummed, casting a harsh, unflattering glow. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and looked again. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. His reflection wasn't quite right. The face staring back was his, yes, but subtly altered. The eyes seemed deeper, shadowed, haunted. A strange, archaic garment clung to his shoulders, shouldered a rough-spun tunic, and a leather jerkin, utterly out of place in the modern setting. He reached out, his fingers brushing the cold surface of the glass. The reflection mirrored his movement, but with a slight, unsettling delay. A tremor ran through him, a primal fear that he couldn't explain. He recoiled, stumbling backward. The reflection didn't follow. It remained, frozen in place, a mocking imitation of his own terror, and then he saw them. Figures in the background of his reflection, standing in the shadows. Men and women dressed in the clothes of the 17th century, their faces obscured by darkness. They were watching him. A single mournful note resonated through the room, a high, piercing sound that seemed to vibrate within his very bones. It was the sound of a violin, played with a haunting, melancholic skill. The note hung in the air, slowly ascending, a lament for a past he could comprehend, a future he desperately feared. The figures in his reflection began to move, their faces slowly resolving into a terrifying recognition.